You are a menace to this community. I've seen it time and time again. You people think you can just show up and disregard every single rule we've worked so hard to establish. It's pathetic. The words cut through the warm evening air, sharper than any blade. Alex's shoulders were slumped, his hands held up in a gesture of weary surrender. Next to him, his best friend, Ben, was biting his lip so hard it had gone white, his eyes darting between the woman yelling at them and the two police officers standing beside their patrol cars. The blue and red lights painted the suburban street. In a surreal, pulsating glow, the officer, a tall, no-nonsense man with a perfectly trimmed mustache, cleared his throat. "Sir, Ms. Albright is alleging a disturbance of the peace and a gross violation of community standards." He paused, glancing from the pristine lawn to the object of Ms. Albright's wrath. "All because of what's in your car, Ms. Albright." A woman whose face was a roadmap of permanent disapproval gestured dramatically toward the vehicle. "It's not just what's in the car, officer. It's the sheer disrespect. It's an eyesore. It's a disgrace. We have rules for a reason." Ben couldn't take it anymore. He let out a disbelieving laugh, a choked, humorless sound. "Lady, it's just groceries. She called the cops on us." For groceries, the officer's face was a study in professional neutrality, but a flicker of something amusement. Pity danced in his eyes as he looked at the open car doors. And that's where our story truly begins. Not in this absurd moment, but hours earlier, when the trouble was just a distant, unspoken threat. Just 3 days earlier, Alex and Ben were the happiest guys on the planet. They just closed on a beautiful, 2-story house in Oakwood Creek, a little slice of suburban heaven with manicured lawns and neat, white picket fences. It was a big step up from their cramped city apartment, and they were ready to embrace the quiet life. "Dude, this is it," Alex had said, his voice echoing in the empty living room. "Freedom. Space. A whole ass house to ourselves." Ben clapped him on the back. "No more sharing the whole way with a neighbor who thinks 3 a.m. is the perfect time for a drum solo. This is the good life, my friend." Their first major mission was to stock the house. Their pantry was a barren wasteland, their fridge a sad, lonely monument to take out. They needed everything. So, with a rental van for extra space, they headed to the nearest superstore. They hit the aisles with a vengeance, their shopping carts overflowing like rivers in a flood. They bought enough toilet paper to last a decade, enough frozen pizzas to start their own pizzeria, and enough cereal to feed a small army. Ben's cart was a monument to protein bars and energy drinks, while Alex's was a more balanced mix of fresh produce, spices, and an impressive collection of artisanal sauces. They were on a mission, and the pure, unadulterated joy of filling their new home's cupboards was a powerful motivator. "I feel like a grown-up," Ben said, grinning, as he carefully stacked 10 boxes of mac and cheese into the back of the van. "We're homeowners. We have a lifetime supply of ketchup." "We're a lot more than that, buddy," Alex replied, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "We're pioneers. We're building our own little empire right here in Oakwood Creek." They drove back, the van swaying under the weight of their conquest. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As they pulled into their driveway, the sight of their new house, their sanctuary, filled them with a profound sense of satisfaction. The moment they opened the van's back doors, they were greeted by a mountain of bags. There were so many that some had to be stacked on the hood of the van itself just to fit. "Holy cow, we went a little overboard," Alex said, laughing. "A little. We bought out the store, man," Ben replied. "Let's just get the perishables inside first, then we can take a break. My back feels like it's 100 years old." They started carrying in bags of milk, meat, and frozen goods, their steps hurried but their spirits high. Just as they were about to head back out for the next load, a woman appeared from behind a perfectly pruned hedge, her step silent and deliberate. She was in her late 60s, with a stiff posture, a sharp, angular face, and a look of permanent disapproval. "It was Miss Albright, gentlemen," she began, her voice as crisp and cold as winter air. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Miss Albright, head of the Homeowners Association. Hi, I'm Alex, and this is Ben. We just moved in." Alex sighed, his smile friendly and genuine. Ms. Albright's eyes weren't smiling. They were scanning their yard, their house, and, finally, the van filled to the brim with groceries. "I'm well aware you've moved in, and I'm also aware that your car and your van are in a state of unapproved disarray." Alex and Ben exchanged a look of utter confusion. "Unapproved disarray," Alex repeated slowly. "Yes, you have left what appears to be a mountain of personal effects in full view of the street. This is a direct violation of Section 4, subsection C of our community bylaws. All personal items, including but not limited to boxes, furniture, and refuse, must be contained within the homeowner's residence or private, enclosed garage. No cluttered exteriors are permitted." Ben scoffed. "They're not personal effects, ma'am, they're groceries. We just got home." Ms. Albright's chin rose, a gesture of supreme indignation. "Whether they are groceries or garbage is irrelevant. The fact is, they are on my property. They are creating a blight on this neighborhood, and what you see as just groceries, I see as an open invitation for pests, vermin, and a collapse in property values. This street is not your personal dumping ground. It's an investment. Mum, with all due respect, we've been here for 5 minutes. We're literally in the middle of bringing them inside," Alex said, his voice now edged with frustration. "You've been here for 5 minutes, and you've already broken the rules. That's a dangerous precedent. It shows a fundamental lack of respect for what we've built here," she said, her voice dropping to a low, threatening tone. "I warned the last young men who moved in here, and they didn't listen. Now, they're gone. Listen, we'll move them. Okay, we'll do it right now," Ben said, stepping forward. "No, it's too late for that. The violation has already occurred. I've given you a chance to listen. You did not. And I am not one to tolerate insubordination." With that, she pulled out a sleek, white smartphone. "I'm calling the authorities." "What? The cops? For groceries?" Alex stammered, his mind reeling from the sheer absurdity of the situation. Ms. Albright smirked, her thumb already dialing a number. "It's not for the groceries, young man. It's for the flagrant disrespect. You will learn, one way or another, that the rules are what hold this community together." And just like that, the call was made, the conversation ended, and a few moments later, the quiet street of Oakwood Creek was lit up by flashing red and blue lights, bringing us right back to where we started. The patrol cars eventually pulled away, their red and blue lights fading into the twilight. The street returned to its quiet, pristine state. Alex and Ben stood there for a moment, the silence feeling heavier than the mountain of groceries still in their driveway. "Did that just happen?" Ben asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "We almost got arrested." For groceries, Alex let out a long breath he didn't realize he was holding. "I think the officer was as confused as we were. He said he'd pass it along to the HOA liaison, but that was just to get Ms. Albright to back off. We're in the clear. For now." They laughed it off, albeit nervously. The groceries were quickly and carefully moved inside, and the car was pulled into the garage. They told themselves it was a one-off event, a ridiculous welcome from a new and overly enthusiastic neighbor. They were wrong. The next day, a perfectly folded piece of paper appeared in their mailbox. It wasn't a friendly note. It was a formal-looking document with the HOA logo at the top. The bold heading read, "Violation Notice." It cited their property for an unapproved external aesthetic disruption, specifically the lack of proper yard and shrub maintenance, including a lawn that exceeds the maximum permissible height of 3 inches. Alex and Ben stood on their front lawn, staring at the grass. It was a perfectly manicured emerald carpet, barely 2 inches high. "This is insane," Ben said, kicking at the grass. "I cut this thing myself 2 days ago. Maybe it's a form letter, a mistake," Alex suggested, a knot forming in his stomach. But they soon learned it was no mistake. The very next day, a new notice arrived. This one was even more absurd. It claimed their welcome mat, a simple mat with the words "Hey y'all" on it, was a violation of neutral aesthetic standards. The notice stated that all exterior decorative items must be approved by the board to maintain a harmonious appearance. Alex couldn't believe it. He had a welcome mat that said, "Hey y'all," and he was getting a written complaint. The harassment continued with a ruthless efficiency. A third notice arrived regarding the new solar-powered garden lights they had installed. Unapproved lighting fixtures. Violation of nighttime light pollution guidelines. A fourth notice pointed out the unauthorized shrub placement, even though the bushes were exactly where the previous homeowners had them. Alex and Ben were no longer laughing. Their frustration was bubbling into anger. They spent their evenings checking the bylaws, trying to find a rule they hadn't broken. But Ms. Albright was an expert at twisting the rules to fit her narrative. The bylaws were full of vague clauses like maintain a harmonious aesthetic or avoid excessive visual clutter, which she used to justify anything she wanted. "Look at this," Ben said, throwing a notice on the kitchen table. The latest one, inadequate watering of lawn, causing a slight brown discoloration. "Ben, the lawn is literally green. It rained this morning." "It doesn't matter what the reality is," Alex said, his voice tight with frustration. "She's not trying to enforce the rules. She's trying to get to us. She's trying to make us crack." They felt like they were living under a microscope. Every time they pulled into the driveway, they'd see Ms. Albright in her window, a silent, disapproving shadow, watching their every move. The joy of moving into their new house had been completely overshadowed by this relentless, petty harassment. "We have to do something," Ben said, clenching his fists. "We can't just let her do this. It's not fair, and it's not right." Alex, however, had a different idea. He remembered the last words Ms. Albright had said. "I warned the last young men who moved in here, and they didn't listen. Now, they're gone." It was a strange threat, one that hinted at a deeper story. This wasn't just about rules. This was personal. "Ben, we're looking at this all wrong," Alex said, his eyes narrowing in thought. "This isn't about the lawn or the welcome mat. It's about her. She's not just a crazy lady. There's something more going on here, and I'm going to find out what it is." The notices kept coming. One for a slightly crooked bird feeder. Another for a stray leaf on the sidewalk. Alex and Ben had stopped laughing and started taking notes. They were no longer victims of a petty tyrant. They were the subjects of an experiment in passive-aggressive warfare, and they were tired of it. "This is completely unhinged," Ben said, staring at a notice that chastised them for unauthorized plant growth on a weed that hadn't even fully sprouted yet. "She's not just a control freak. She's obsessed with us." "Why us, specifically? That's what I want to know," Alex replied, pulling out his laptop. He had an idea. It was time to fight fire with fire, and his preferred weapon was a keyboard. "I'm not a detective, but I'm good at finding things online. Every story has a beginning, and so does Ms. Albright's." For the rest of the evening, the two friends became amateur sleuths. Alex started with public records, searching for Ms. Albright's full name and address. He cross-referenced it with old neighborhood newsletters and articles. Ben scoured social media, looking for any profile that matched her. They found a few old, private accounts belonging to someone with her surname, but nothing substantial. Then, Alex found a breakthrough. It wasn't on a social media site, but on an old, long-forgotten forum for community leaders. Tucked away in a dusty corner of the internet was a local news article from about 5 years ago, celebrating Ms. Albright's tireless work as a community volunteer. The article was short, But it had a crucial piece of information, a photo. It showed Ms. Albright, much younger, smiling stiffly next to her husband and their son. Alex's blood ran cold. He zoomed in on the photo of the son. The resemblance was uncanny. The same dark, messy hair, the same sharp jawline, the same weary look in his eyes. It was like looking at a different version of himself. Ben, you have to see this, Alex whispered. Ben leaned over, his eyes widening. Wait a minute, is that? Yeah, that's her son. The article says his name is Jason, and he left town for college a few years ago, after a disagreement with his parents about his future. Alex said, quoting the article. But I found a second article from a few months after the first one. It's a small piece in the local paper. It talks about a community leadership dispute and how Ms. Albright's son left and never came back. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The last young men she mentioned, they weren't just random people. They were probably young men who, like her son, defied her need for control and perfection. The grocery incident, the lawn, the welcome mat, it wasn't about the rules at all. It was about Alex and Ben. She doesn't see us, Alex said, his voice quiet. She sees him. She sees a second chance to mold someone into her perfect image. We're a living reminder of the one person she couldn't control, and now she's going to try to control us instead. The weight of this new revelation was heavy. Ms. Albright wasn't a one-dimensional villain. She was a deeply flawed, lonely woman, projecting her past trauma onto two strangers. But that didn't excuse her actions. It just gave them a new weapon. They now knew her weakness. They knew the emotional reason behind her madness. So, what do we do with this? Ben asked, a newfound determination in his voice. Alex closed his laptop, a smirk forming on his face. We don't just fight her rules anymore, we fight her. And we're going to use this information to end her reign of terror once and for all. The community center's meeting room was a sterile, unforgiving space. A long plastic table sat in the middle, surrounded by 7 folding chairs. 5 of them were occupied by the members of the Oakwood Creek HOA board, a collection of tired-looking homeowners who seemed to be questioning all of their life choices at that moment. At one end sat Ms. Albright, her back straight and her expression a mask of smug righteousness. At the other end, Alex and Ben felt a mix of nerves and resolve. All right, let's get this over with, Ms. Albright said, her voice dripping with impatience. Mr. Ben and Mr. Alex have requested this emergency session to, what was the phrase? Address a pattern of targeted and absurd harassment. I'd like to state for the record that I have only upheld the community bylaws. Alex took a deep breath. Thank you, Ms. Albright. We won't take up too much of your time. He pulled a thick folder from his bag and placed it on the table. This is a log of every violation notice we've received since moving in. The list, as you'll see, is extensive. He started to read them aloud, one by one. The HOA board members, initially bored, began to lean forward. Notice for excessive visual clutter due to the presence of grocery bags, sent on our first day here. Notice for improper lawn height, even though it was just cut. Notice for a welcome mat that was not approved. Notice for unapproved garden lights. Notice for the discoloration of our perfectly green lawn. The board members exchanged bewildered glances. One man, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. Ms. Albright, a welcome mat. Is that an actual bylaw? It falls under Section 4, subsection C. She replied without blinking. Neutral aesthetic standards. A bright yellow mat with that phrase on it, is not neutral. Ben couldn't help but interject. Come on, everyone. This is ridiculous. She called the cops on us for having groceries in our car. The cops. Do you think that's a normal, reasonable action for a neighbor to take? Ms. Albright smirked, a self-satisfied expression spreading across her face. I acted within my right as head of this association to protect the standards of our community. Their behavior was a clear sign of disrespect from the start. They are a threat to our values. They are trying to. Double quotes to be like your son, Jason, Alex said, his voice quiet but sharp. The room fell silent. Ms. Albright's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash offer, unadulterated shock. Her hands, which had been resting calmly on the table, gripped the edge so tightly her knuckles went white. What did you say? She hissed. We did some research, Ms. Albright, Alex continued, his confidence growing. We found an old article about you, your husband, and your son, Jason. It talked about how he left home after a dispute with you. He was a young man, much like us, who wanted to live his own life and not follow the path you set for him. A tense whisper went through the room. The board members looked from Alex to Ms. Albright, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This isn't about the bylaws, Alex said, his voice now strong and clear. It's about you. You saw us, two young men moving in, and you saw a second chance. A chance to control people who remind you of the person you couldn't control. You're not protecting the community. You're projecting your own regrets onto us. The violations are just an excuse. Ms. Albright's composure finally broke. She stood up so fast her chair clattered to the floor. How dare you? This is an outrageous and personal attack. You have no right to speak of my family. Her face was red with fury, her voice trembling with emotion. You're right, Ben said calmly. We have no right. But what right did you have to call the cops on us? What right did you have to send a dozen fake violation notices? You've been trying to run us out of here, just like you did with the last people who lived in this house. Double quotes. Ms. Albright pointed a shaking finger at Alex. You are just like him, disrespectful, rebellious. You think you can just come into this beautiful community and do whatever you want. Mr. Henderson, the most senior board member, finally spoke up. Ms. Albright, please, sit down. Your behavior is unacceptable. It appears there may be a personal bias at play here. This is not how we conduct ourselves. Bias, she shrieked, her voice cracking. This is not bias. This is order. This is what keeps this community from falling into chaos. These two are a menace, just like Jason was. She had said the quiet part out loud. The secret was out. The board members looked at her with a mix of shock and pity. Ms. Albright, seeing the game was over, slumped back into her chair, defeated. The rules no longer mattered. Her obsession was exposed, and her power was gone. The climax was complete. The stunned silence that followed Ms. Albright's outburst was deafening. The board members stared at her, their expressions a mix of pity and disgust. Her carefully constructed facade of authority had crumbled in an instant, revealing a deeply troubled woman who had used her power to mend her own broken heart. Mr. Henderson, the board president, cleared his throat. Ms. Albright, he said, his voice firm but not unkind, based on the clear evidence of targeted harassment and the emotional distress you have shown, this board has no choice but to immediately suspend your position as head of the Homeowners Association. He motioned for a motion, and the other members, without a word, raised their hands in a unanimous vote. Defeated, Ms. Albright said nothing. She simply gathered her purse, her shoulders slumped in a way Alex and Ben had never seen before. She walked out of the room, her head held low, the very embodiment of the power she had just lost. The reign of terror was over. For the next few weeks, the neighborhood of Oakwood Creek underwent a subtle but profound change. The air felt lighter, people smiled and waved. One evening, a man from 3 houses down came over to thank Alex and Ben. I'm Bob, he said, shaking their hands warmly. Ms. Albright sent me a notice last year because my Halloween decorations were unseasonably spooky. I took them down. We were all a little scared of her. To be honest, you guys did something. For all of us, the lawn height notices stopped. The complaints about the welcome mat disappeared. The neighborhood, once living in silent fear of a single person's obsessive rules, now felt like a genuine community. Neighbors started talking, having cookouts, and simply enjoying their homes without looking over their shoulders. Alex and Ben, who had just wanted to live in peace, had accidentally become heroes, and so, about a month later, they found themselves in the exact same spot where the whole ordeal had started. They were unloading the second half of the massive grocery haul they'd left in the garage, laughing about how they still had enough hot sauce to last them a lifetime. Ben picked up a large box of cereal. "Well, at least this time, we don't have to worry about a surprise visit from the cops. I hope not." Alex chuckled, carrying in a case of water bottles. It would be a real shame to make a big show of this again. As they unloaded the last of the bags, they looked up to see a familiar figure. It was Miss Albright. She stood in her window, a silent, solitary figure. Her eyes met theirs for a brief moment, but this time there was no anger or indignation in her gaze, only a quiet defeat. She simply turned and disappeared back into her home, a lonely queen in a kingdom where she no longer held any power. Alex and Ben didn't say anything. They just gave each other a knowing look. The battle was won, the lessons were learned, and a new, more peaceful life in Oakwood Creek had finally begun.